Growth Pod is brought to you by Genero, a leading growth agency in the Nordics. We interview marketing experts, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to uncover the stories and strategies behind profitable growth.
Today I'm joined by Niclas Sandin, the CEO of BookBeat. BookBeat is a digital subscription service for audiobooks and ebooks. Since its launch in 2015, BookBeat has grown to over 900,000 paying customers across Europe and will pass over 100 million euros in revenue in 2023. Welcome to the show, Niclas.
Glad to be here. I'm really honored that you invited me to come. I actually listened to a couple of the episodes and I enjoy the talks you have had with different business leaders and probably learned a couple of things from them too.
I'm really glad to hear that. And this BookBeat story is definitely one of exactly the kind of growth story that we want to talk about on this podcast. So for people who do not know about the background, can you briefly talk about how BookBeat came to be and how you became involved as the CEO?
Yeah, of course. Well, to begin with, I love working with data and people and also building things by combining those two. In 2012, I was recruited from a section of EY that worked with growth companies like Spotify, etc. back in the days, to audiobooks, which is one of the leading book publishers in Europe and actually the biggest seller of digital books to different retailers. My job initially was to analyze and create a business plan for their book clubs. And after that, I got the job to make the business plan happen by running them. And just since not everyone will know what the book clubs are, they were an amazing business, but had a hard time growing anymore since the model was built on physical sales of books, sending books home to people. And the target audience was getting pretty old. In that position, I spent a couple of years nagging the management of audiobooks about how they also should do a Netflix, like meaning moving beyond sending DVDs home to people's mailboxes in a physical way and go all in on streaming. And in 2015, the timing was right. And since I seemed the most eager one in the organization about this venture, they gave me the mission to build a new service and the business from scratch. But to make sure that we put all our focus on creating a demand from books, for books from the end users rather than just fulfilling publishers' wishes, BookBeat was built as an totally organic startup, independent from the publishers, but of course taking the good parts out of them and getting fueled with their long-term commitment of believing and investing in our core business. So that's how it got started back in 2015 and how I ended up there. It's actually now, when I come to think about it, almost exactly 8 years since we left the starting blocks and launched our beta version on November 30th in 2015. And to say the least, it's been a crazy journey and love to be here to share some of it with you and your listeners.
That's awesome. And I think it's probably quite unique that, like you said, this was a spin-off from a family-owned business that's been around for like 200 years almost. But they also had recognized that they need to do this as a completely standalone service. So you had kind of the backing, all the good. It sounds like you had the good and the best of both worlds. You had the resources of a large company, but also the autonomy of a completely, standalone startup.
Yeah, exactly. One of the family's core values is we plan for generations, not quarters, and their end game have probably never been to do a total exit with BookBeat, but rather extend one of their core businesses for the next 100 years. This means that we have been able to build a great business rather than kind of constantly pushing equity stories that align with the current buzzwords. Not that I say that anyone else is doing that, but we have been able to focus on what we believe is the best for the business and not what sounds good at the moment to raise capital. And this has probably served us well, and is the reason why we have had a pretty nice growth story so far, that we have been able to focus on the long term, but at the same time, of course, checking off the boxes and succeeding in the short term to show that we're on the right path. So the best kind of both worlds, long-term commitment from them and not getting to focus on really building a good business.
Totally. What you mentioned, it's been almost 8 years now. And what was the strategy, the idea when you launched? Because this was you were not the first to market. So how were you thinking about competitiveness and customer acquisition and the long-term strategy behind BookBeat when you first launched?
Well, actually, before moving into the exact way we set up the customer acquisition, we have to come back to what was the overall strategy for BookBeat. And since I started with a blank piece of paper and pretty huge expectations from a really big company of what to fill that blank paper with, back in 2015, I quickly had to formulate a strategic framework that would work both for the short and long-term business building, and for me and the people joining our journey to hold on to when we face challenges, but at the same time when we enjoyed successes. So based on my experiences of analyzing growth companies back at EY and adding some management book mumbo jumbo that I've seen actually work in reality, I scribbled down an overall strategy that this still is the foundation for BookBeat. To begin with, the overall vision is to step by step create something that will lead the way for decades. Sounds pretty grand, but it's more coming back to not just try to do something that works in the short term and do an exit. So this means that we're in a constant building mode. We don't rely on silver bullets, but rather just long-term grit. And to achieve that vision, it comes down to how well we execute on our 4 strategic pillars that I've been speaking about for 8 years now to everyone in the team. The first one is pretty simple. It's first who, then what. It means that to deliver the best service and adapt to new behaviors and context, we need a team that can create, it can innovate, and it can grow. We have almost no consultants in the organization, and a mix between 50-50 between developers and analysts and the other trades like marketing and content. This means that we have almost no experience waste when the team overcomes challenges, and we actually add that to our knowledge base. And it means that the team grows simultaneously with the business. So far we have 150 extremely talented specialists in our core areas that have joined our journey. That's one of the key things, coming then later to the other part of the strategy. The second pillar that we have built BookBeat on is don't get stuck in the starting block. That really sounds like management mumbo jumbo when you say it, but for us it means that an idea has not been tested until it has reached a customer. It comes from my firm belief that if you try to find the perfect solution for something already at the drawing board, you risk paralyzing your organization. So this should, of course, not give us the opportunity to just throw out a lot of shitty features and launch on random markets, but rather doing stuff that makes sense without knowing exact impact beforehand and build on that, what we learned from the initial try. But to make sure that we always follow up on what we do and get real actionable insight, the third pillar at BookBeat is the one that I get the people in the team to repeat most of the times when they talk about our strategy, and it's data-driven since day one. This means that only our own data can make us better than the competition. There are so many, I use the word shitty again, shitty marketing surveys out there that fail to give the real view of the market, and they act as an alibi to show that you make the right decision, but often I guess they inspire companies to make pretty huge mistakes. So we should not rely solely on surveys, but rather more on what we learn by ourselves along the way from our own data. An example of that is that before we launched BookBeat, we did a survey here in Sweden about the willingness to pay for this type of service and what the market potential was. In that marketing survey, it said that on the current price point, the long-term potential of the market was 100,000 paying users. And now, 8 years later, the total market is 900,000 paying users at that price point. I think it's almost even a little bit higher. So again, we would have lost out on 9 parts of that market. So, and same thing in Finland. When we launched back in 2016, nobody was really interested in what we have built. And now, if we combined all of the services there, I guess it's over 500,000 people out of 5.5 million population that pay every month for our type of service. So surveys will by design not tell you the truth about the market, and you have to find it through your own experiments. And this is what we want to do by being data-driven since day one. Doesn't mean that we should do endless A/B testing of every small innovation, but actually follow up on what we do to make sure that we are spending our time and resources on the right thing. And on that note, we get to pillar number 4. Small steps are better than big leaps. And this means that innovation and growth will be the sum of all the small data-driven steps that we take in the right direction. And we build our momentum over time by building on what we do great and stop doing what doesn't work. It's all about every day just getting that flywheel to spin a little bit faster. So everyone in the organization is really tired about me talking about this, but they should know these pillars as running waters, and when in doubt, turn to them when they decide on how to handle different challenges. So the 4 pillars: first who, then what, don't get stuck in starting block, data-driven since day one, and small steps are better than big leaps. So that's the foundation, and then we can get to more of how we use that in marketing.
That's incredible. I think it seems to me very uncommon that companies from day one or very early on identify kind of these principles or pillars, and then they actually stay consistent to them as they're building their business. Because I think it's quite remarkable that, you're now doing 100 million revenue and the principles are as relevant as they were when you were doing 0. That's pretty incredible.
But it was, first of all, to be pretty open, I had to do some expectations management with our owners in the beginning, so they understood that we were building it for the long term and not to focus too much on what was the results the first month or the first 2 months, but actually looking more at the long-term signal. Are we building something that constantly are getting better? So it was also a way for me to make sure that they kept faith in our overall business plan. But at the same time, you shouldn't create a strategy that becomes obsolete too soon, just as you reach success. It should be something that can last over time, and it shouldn't either be too specific either, because then you would have to replace it as soon as you become a scale up instead of a startup.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I think I've referred to Amazon way too much in the podcast previously, but Jeff Bezos' idea of like focusing on things that won't change and building your strategy around that as opposed to things that will change. And he said very simply, like, I can't imagine a future where customers will want higher prices, smaller selection, and slower delivery. So let's just build on those 3 key pillars.
Yeah, and for us, our version of that is, of course, we cannot imagine a future where we don't want the best specialists working in an organization, where we don't dare to try out new things, where we don't dare to try to understand those things by being data-driven, and also make sure that we constantly are becoming a little bit better. So they work really over time, but when you start to think about them, when you apply them to different areas of the company, they also pretty much help us of what we should do. And especially in marketing, which I guess will be the focus of this podcast, on how we have used it to help us grow.
Yeah, so let's get into that, because, you had the strategy. It makes a lot of sense. The owners, the stakeholders, everyone's on board. So the first market you launched in is Sweden, and you were not the first on the market. Your competitor, Storyteller, had already been around for 10 years or something like that, for a very long time.
Yeah.
They held 100% of the market. And you came in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you did not really have any USP in terms of catalog. Like, you didn't come with, we have, this amount of books or these types of books that you don't have. So what was the strategy what was the strategy for trying to grow in that kind of market?
Yeah, at our launch, I was pretty open with especially our owners that we did not have anything that Storytel didn't have. But at the same time, it didn't matter. On a growing market, it's so much important to become top of mind for new users entering the market, rather than trying to differentiate yourself from competitors that the new users, even though Storytel had 100% market share, most people didn't know anything about them. So instead, focus on becoming top of mind for for the new users entering the market. So instead, we talked about being more focused and distinctive in everything we were doing, especially our marketing. And this has meant that we step by step have now grown to almost 250,000 paying users in Sweden, and currently are growing faster than all of our competitors and gaining market share every quarter. So putting too much emphasis on USPs sometimes can make you rather stupid as a business and narrow down your message and the target group too much. And now, 8 years later, there are differences in the offerings that has primarily been built by us during the time we have been on the market. But we continue to talk about books that people like and the values the users get, rather than saying we have this, but our competitors don't have it. Because most users still don't care about the differences. They care about what value can you bring me. So that has been our focus in our marketing, and trying to enter a market where somebody actually had 100% market share, not looking at how can we differentiate ourselves day one, but actually go out there and get users in and change the stuff that seems to be threshold for getting them into our service, rather than just talking about differences, because most people don't compare. Then we should focus instead on getting them in without them having to look at every other service doing so.
I think that's a really good reminder for us marketers, because we can feel that, immediately our minds go to, okay, what's the USP? No, you need to have a USP that we can communicate. And you're saying that was actually you didn't care about that at all when you started. But you mentioned that top of mind awareness, that was kind of what you were going after. So when you were approaching that, were you thinking, okay, now it's a matter of kind of like, we need to buy a lot of media, we need to just get frequency and reach? Or did you have any other tactics when it came to building that top of mind awareness and getting new users?
Yeah, at the same time, I of course have to be pretty open. If you would do some tracking in Sweden, our competitors probably have more awareness than us overall, since they are bigger than us and been around for a longer time. But I think building top of mind awareness for the people that are in the minute that they want to make a decision about this type of service. So the overall tactic is pretty boring, but it has been distinctiveness in what we do, trying to get more overall users to us and the category, rather than limiting ourselves to only cater to the heavy users. And this means that focusing, of course, also on the details of our messaging to make it as appealing to as many people as possible. So we don't just preach to a choir saying, audiobooks for the people that love books. No, we're instead talking about audiobooks. It's actually for everyone. And here is a book that I think you probably will love. Get the service, become an audiobook listener. So we don't try to more communicate that this is something for the few. It's actually just like video streaming. It's something for everyone, and trying to get everyone feeling that this could be for me too. And the other tactic is, of course, be super clear about who is sending the message, because since we're building the category, we of course have to be really clear that it's BookBeat that putting in a lot of money in building that category. So I guess I'm pretty biased here, but you can really tell a BookBeat ad apart from the competition in both design and creativity, even though for an untrained eye, our offer are pretty much the same service as our peers. So I can add more stuff to the strategy, but not thinking about these are our power users, how can we get more of them, but instead talking about how do we lower the threshold for everyone that haven't made this acquired taste part of their everyday life. And that puts a lot of pressure on how you communicate, because you cannot look too much inward at what the best users are saying. You have to instead look outwards at what value can you add to the people that haven't found out about us yet.
Yeah, that's really good. I feel like, again, going back to us marketers, there's a temptation when we look at, let's say we do a survey of customers and we identify, these 5% of customers with these attributes are, they're the heavy users. Let's just get more of these. And we falsely assume that we are able to impact people's behavior on grand scale. And what you're saying is you recognize that actually there's going to be a small percentage that are going to be power users, but let's try to grow the category, and we're going to get a lot of light users, light buyers, but that's okay. That's okay. We'll need that to break to kind of create this huge business that we're going after.
Yeah, but actually, one example of this, because I know one of your home countries, Finland, that's a market where we were one of the first entrants. We launched there back in 2016, so the same time as our main competitor. And there we implemented the exact same strategy as we have done in Sweden. And so far, Finland has become the land of milk and honey for BookBeat when we have done that. And here we launched on a market where there were only a couple of hundred books available on the market. And most publishers did not see the need for them beyond the users that were blind and couldn't read. For those were the potential audiobook listeners. Now in 2023, I said that the total market in Finland probably over 500,000 out of 5.5 million that pay for a service. But just in BookBeat, we have passed 300,000 paying users. So over 5% of the Finnish population is now paying for us. And this is just 7 years into our journey where we have built a completely new category as the market leader. If we would have just focused on the heavy users, which for publisher were people that couldn't see, that's why they wanted the audiobooks, and no market survey said that anybody wanted any of this, we would probably just say, let's just not go to Finland. But instead, we focus on more, there should be an appeal, we can create it, even though it can cost a lot to build a category, but at the same time, we could piggyback on us offering something that people already valued. People already value books, even though they don't always buy them, but we already had an offering that people could attach a value to. So building a new category under those circumstances is probably a lot easier than trying to invent something totally new. So knowing that, we dared to actually go against what the common knowledge was. So is there potential here in the market? And that's also something that we have used when we have made other decisions regarding our offering and so on, that don't try to just go after the heavy users, because you probably will miss out on a lot of the target audience. And you wouldn't get to a point where we're at right now in Finland, where I often try to throw out the number that this year it will be, I think, 84 million hours that will be listened to our service in just Finland. And if you divide that with the Finnish population, it's 15 hours per Finn that they will listen to BookBeat during 2023. So BookBeat per capita is that high. But if we would have just focused on the heavy user and where there were apparent potential from day one, we wouldn't have that number to throw out there. So don't limit your target audience too narrow, because you will lose out on a lot of potential then.
Yeah, that's such good advice. You mentioned that what the distinctiveness has been a key kind of pillar in creating that top line awareness and growing the category, and then making sure that you capture some of that new category growth. And you mentioned that the goal has been to be very distinct in your advertising, for instance. I think that's true for me. When I think back, as you were talking about that, one ad stands out for me. That's the guy who's cleaning, and he pushes one of the pots so it breaks, so he can continue cleaning and listening to a book. I don't know if you... Yeah.
I remember. Yep.
So what was the... Yeah, so I agree with that. I think that just, I mean, before I knew much about anything, I remember seeing that ad. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the creative insights that led you to develop this, the messaging strategy that's allowed you to create that distinctiveness?
I think it's hard to narrow it down to a few aspects. The first thing is that we have, of course, a really, really talented marketing team working with this every day, and a lot of them has been on our journey since almost the start. So they have, of course, built up an experience. When did we go right with our messaging, and when did we go wrong? And some of them can come up with different answers on the same question. So having a lot of talented people that over time try out a lot of things and kind of can calibrate their creativity, of course, helps. But other than that, I think it's also, I said earlier that most surveys are pretty shitty, but some of them can actually give you some inspiration. So what we have done is, of course, do some kind of driver survey on our different market. What could drive a user to get our type of service? And then we look primarily at interesting groups for us. And from that, we can get some inspiration. What can be the kind of tone of voice that we use in our communication? What can be the things we should talk about, which almost never is technical specifics of your product. It's actually more talk about the value that you provide them. So we have gotten some inspiration from that, and then done a lot of trial and error, and also utilized tools like, I don't remember the name of a product, where we can send out to a specific group of people pilots of our marketing and get initial feedback. And we're not really interested if they like it, but we want to hear what type of words popped into their head when they saw our marketing. And that has also been something that we have, the team have been able to utilize to just recognize how it's actually perceived our different type of marketing messages. So a lot of creativity have been tested, and we have a lot of talented people, but otherwise, overall, it's the trial and error that helps us along the way to find out where are we too creative and where are we just enough creative. So keeping that discussion going within the team is probably really important.
Totally. Related to the question of creativity is obviously the media and media placement in channels. We talked a little bit offline, and you mentioned that you've been by constantly tweaking the media mix. You've been able to see pretty big changes in whether it's signups or customer acquisition cost, and even in kind of mature markets like Finland, where you're the clear market leader. So can you talk a little bit about, first of all, how you're thinking about the media mix and how you're running those tests? Because, obviously it sounds very simple. Like, of course we're going to test and we'll see what these channels that drive the best results, we're going to focus on those. Okay. Yes. But how do you make those tests? And then is there any maybe generalized lessons about media choices that you've learned?
Yeah, sure. Well, overall, our growth strategy is constantly searching for the equilibrium between safe bets and spray and pray. That's what we do, and I guess every growth marketer does that. And one thing we do is that we buy all of our media ourselves and have our own in-house experts for different channels, as well as a growth data science team that works really close with our marketers. This means that we can quickly adapt if anything changes. And one thing, just to give you an example, we saw last year was less effect in some of our bigger channels, both in the short term, but more importantly, the long term during the months when we did less pushes, because then is where we can actually see what is the new baseline. The team then calibrated and rebalanced the mix in different markets and put more effort into the messaging. And so far this year, we have seen pretty amazing results. I think we have grown the user base with over 30%. At the same time, the average customer acquisition cost has dropped with more than that. Also on our more mature markets, as you say. But again, some examples what got us there. And the overall lesson I can give is to always keep your marketing investments dynamic by design. You have to be ready to kill your darlings and dare to experiment with different channels and throw more gasoline on already burning fires when you start to get some effect. Because even though everything cannot be tracked in the short term, and a lot of marketing is for the long term, the short-term impact, for instance, visit to your web page or short-term growth of new users talking about you in Google Trends or signing up, give you at least an indication if people at all is responding to your message and find it relevant. So having a really dynamic setup and try to see the short-term signals, not viewing them as the absolute truth if you're doing the right thing, because everything isn't performance marketing. Some of it is actually for the long term. But the short-term impact gives you a signal if you're relevant. Because if people aren't even visiting your web page when you do the biggest campaign ever, I guess you probably won't have that much long-term effect in 2 years. So you have to have some signal. And as soon as you start to see that you get more signals when you utilize one channel, perhaps throw even more gasoline on that burning fire. So have a really dynamic design of how you do your marketing investment is probably the most important thing.
And when it comes to signals, which kind of metrics are you personally looking at most? And how do you think about qualitative versus quantitative signals?
The $1 million question that I should tread lightly here, otherwise I will get different parts of the marketing team responding to what I say. But it will always be hard to track long-term investment in marketing. And since BookBeat started, I think we have been hovering between 25 and 50% of our marketing budget going into more broad channels like TV, outdoor marketing, radio. So really big channels where you build a lot of trust over time, but you can also have short-term impact. I remember when we started BookBeat, every time we did a TV spot, I was into Google Analytics during the minutes afterward to see how much traffic did we get the conversion. And actually, we could count home a lot of our TV investment by actually real signups in the beginning because it was such a good channel. But this was back in 2016. TV does not perform that way now, and we shouldn't expect that. But that was one way of looking at it. If we do a TV commercial, we'll talk about our BookBeat webpage address and telling people this is a really good thing. It doesn't cost you anything to try us out because we always have free trials. If we even during those circumstances cannot get them interested enough, it tells us a little bit about the messaging. Probably more than doing this long-term tracking every month of seeing what's happening with our awareness, since we're so small. As I mentioned in Finland, even though we have 5% of the population, probably double that have tried BookBeat since day one, but still just perhaps 10% of the population that have heard about us. So if you do this broad tracking, it will be really hard to actually get any signal from it because we're much smaller than the big, brands like Coca-Cola or Nike or car manufacturers. So we have to really focus on getting the signals other ways. So one way is actually looking at the short-term effect. And one example also, when we did a lot of broad marketing in Germany, we decided to do it pretty focused because just doing marketing in the, for instance, Berlin area covers pretty much the same amount of people like all of Finland. So then we did a really big marketing push with outdoor marketing, local radio and so on in the Berlin area. And then we could track what was the difference in traffic in that area compared to the other ones. And then we can extrapolate if we did it in more areas, what the overall effect would be. It's not really clear what the exact result is, but it gives you an indication. So for the long term, I think you should look after signals that give you an indication if you're relevant and have some impact. It doesn't have to be signups, but are people looking at your web page? Or do you see an increased traffic? Perhaps they don't sign up, but at least you got them interested. So that's important. And then you have the more safe bets part, which is the performance marketing and tactical marketing, where we utilize a lot of influencer podcasts and so on. And there we, of course, often have a promo code and we can see how many people do they send to our webpage. So most of our influencer collaborations, we have been able to look at through the lens of what was the customer acquisition cost for this campaign. And most of them are actually really profitable. So we have utilized it a lot. So different ways of looking at it. The long term, I think you should be out there trying to identify signals when you do stuff. Instead of trying to wait 1 year to see if it gives you any move of the needle in a tracking, you should actually start to see, do you get any short-term signals? And then you put more gasoline on those fires. But if you, for instance, do a really big TV campaign and you don't see any increase in traffic to your webpage, you should stop doing that TV campaign and perhaps do more outdoor marketing or more radio marketing and see if you get any more traction from it. So not just doing stuff and saying this will show us something in 1 year. Especially if you're a growth company, you cannot wait that long just to know if you're putting your money at least on something that gives somewhat of an effect.
Yeah, it sounds like a very kind of pragmatic growth marketing approach, which I've seen be really effective. And obviously it looks very different for different companies, but you're trying to find the best signals that you can and make the best informed decisions and just keep going. Another thing that's been really important for you is we've talked a lot about the marketing, but you've also used the business model as a way to drive growth, presumably. You've changed or been kind of at the forefront of making changes there. For instance, moving from previously used to be unlimited, and now you guys offer, I think maybe the other ones do as well, tiered subscriptions. So can you talk about the insight that led you to make that change and what the results were?
Yeah, of course. Well, when we started off, as I mentioned earlier, every service was pretty similar. So everyone had the same offer, unlimited listening for pretty much the same price all over the Nordics. But when we entered Germany, we had to face off with another peer, which was Amazon's service Audible. And they had a little bit different offer and a lower price point than us. And we cannot just go in there. It should work the way that it does in the Nordics. So we instead have to, of course, go back to a drawing board a little bit. And to handle that, we innovated our offer based on all of the data we had collected so far. And what we could see was that only 5% of the users listened more than 100 hours per month. But they stood for over 25% of our content cost. So they basically held up the prices for the other 95% and in a way limited the extension of the market for the more price-sensitive groups. And what we did then, based on that data, was to invent the tier system. We weren't the first with tiers, but the first one in our field at least, with BookBeat Basic at 20 hours, priced at $9.99. And then we added some other tiers, which, for instance, BookBeat Premium up to 100 hours, and priced them at appealing levels for different target groups. Because we, going back to again, we are an acquired taste. People build the behavior over time. A new user coming in will think that 20 hours sounds a lot, but once you're getting used to it, perhaps you want to add even more, and then you will be in a good position to upgrade. And the experiment was so successful, generating growth, but also helping our margins in a way. So we have now implemented it on all our markets and completely removed unlimited. And this is really our strategic pillars in action. By being on a market, understanding the data, and step-by-step building something that's better than the competition. But as you mentioned, actually now most of our competitors have, with somewhat pride, started to copy our model. So I guess we have to innovate some more to keep them behind us. But it's an example, going into a market, not just using the same tool set, but actually seeing the signals and looking through our data. What can we do based on what we know? And then we found out that this is probably a good way to go to extend the market to more user groups instead of just catering to the 5% that really want unlimited and listen a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the same theme of like what you mentioned in the beginning, that the estimated total addressable market was 100,000 users. Now it turns out it's 9 times that large. And I guess the kind of one of the carrying principles in BookBeat has been this defiance of conventional wisdom, is that you don't just accept it at face value, but you want to kind of see the data for yourself and try to figure it out and improve.
Yeah. This can also be a way of just running out of cliffs. So not looking at the danger side and just, oh no, we believe in this. No, but overall, I think coming back to, as I said, data-driven from day one, only our own data can make us better than the competitors. So if everybody's looking at the same Boston Consulting Group presentation about what you should do as a company at this growth stage, we won't be set apart from the other ones. Not through differentiation, but we won't be set apart through strategy, and we won't be able to impact the market either over time. So we have to find our own way and find our own data. But at the same time, this, of course, shouldn't make us immune to everything happening around us, because then we probably will fall off the cliff. But start with, what do we know by ourselves, so we don't have to trust all of the signals everyone else is telling us, because none of our competitors will try to tell us something that we actually could use. They will just frame it the way they want to. So we have to find our own way. And I think this is a difference compared to other services that perhaps build their differentiation by adding, oh, you do books, you do audiobooks, let's do magazines too, and let's bundle with something else. Instead, we were more no, the real potential is in digital audiobooks. Let's just double down into that and become even better. Can we find new ways of extending that market instead of trying to appeal to a totally different market? And I think that's also connected to the long-term strategy, is that we're building something to work for the long term in our field instead of just trying to find ways of proving the business for the short term.
Totally. Let's talk a little bit about the future. You've made a good case for kind of the competitive strategy that you've had at BookBeat so far has been incredibly successful. Recently, another Swedish company, Spotify, announced a pilot, I guess, where they'd make 150,000 audiobooks available at no extra cost to premium users in the UK and Australia. If this is successful, they're probably going to roll it out worldwide. So how do you think about, the competitive landscape changing? Are you going to stick to the 4 pillars, or when companies like Spotify, which have massive global brand awareness, are able to add this to their existing as a free add-on to existing users, paying users? Is that change? Does that change how you think about competitive strategy, or no?
No, well, I think to begin with, it's really exciting that Spotify ventures into our core. It validates it in a way. But I think it's worth mentioning every time this question come up, because it comes up a lot, is that they also enter into another ball game than they are used to. Digital audiobooks is an extremely local affair. Over 90% of our listening in our different markets is in the local language. And this compared to Spotify, where I think 80% of the listening to an artist is outside of their home country without any alterations to the music. It actually travels everywhere. But in books, often there's local translation of global phenomena. So Spotify will have to play the local game and agree with local publishers on every market that they enter, just like we have. So being a global platform will not help them there in just spreading everywhere. I think it has been easier in a way with music, because there are a couple of global music labels that own a lot of music that has gotten them started. Here they have to go really local. And as a matter of fact, we already compete with Spotify also in Germany, where they offer a lot of audiobooks, and we have still been able to be one of the leading platforms together with them and Amazon's Audible service. So until proven differently, I guess we will be continue to doing what we are doing with our 4 strategic pillars and playing the local game. But until, I guess, we get punched in the face and have to reevaluate, like with every strategy. So I think it's really interesting that they're entering the field, but it won't be that they automatically can just go in and swoop every market. And I think it's similar to Amazon when they launched here in Scandinavia, and some people said that most e-commerce stores will go out of business when Amazon enters. But they also entered a market that already was pretty mature and already had a lot of strong local players. So they are playing a role, but it doesn't mean that they will become the leader overnight. And perhaps it will be a little bit similar when Spotify ventures into our markets here. But I think they will have a big impact on the English-speaking markets primarily. In the US, Audible has almost no competition. So finally, they now will have a match with Spotify that view the US market as one of the most important ones. So we'll see. Everybody has a strategy until they're punched in the face. But so we remain with the strategic pillars, but also we know the context in this market isn't similar to the music industry. So perhaps that will give us some more thresholds that will prevent a global player to have too much benefit of being a global player.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Immediately what comes to mind is one of the big Finnish success stories, Volt, because they built a huge business by going to these smaller markets in, for instance, Eastern Europe and throughout Europe mainly, avoiding obviously the big English-speaking markets where DoorDash and Uber Eats and all those big players are dominating it. It would have been incredibly expensive and probably not very successful to go into those markets. So that's a good point, that a global platform is not necessarily going to transfer over into the dominance of multiple smaller local markets.
Yeah, but at the same time, we should be really humble before the fact that we don't really know what impact they can have on this type of market. But It's not automatically that they will be as successful in this as they have been in music, because it's another ball game.
Totally. Another future trend that's obviously probably a question you get also almost or probably more frequently is about AI. So how are you seeing that impact already, and especially for the future, the industry that you're in? I'm thinking of obviously AI generated books, which could change the entire value chain, right? Who owns the content? But also things like, because you mentioned how important it is that it's local. So just like AI powered translation of books, which could maybe expand the catalog in a completely different way. So how are you thinking about AI right now?
This is, of course, a buzzword where we should have a really good opinion and talk about how we're in the forefront of everything.
Some AI-powered service that you're about to launch.
yeah, and it will take over the world. No, of course, I'm humbled before the fact that there will be a lot of impact in many areas from generative AI. But at the same time, in the industry where we're at, it does not solve that many problems for us in terms of published books at this point. We actually already in our type of service see a supply of books that is higher than the actual demand. A lot of books that nobody actually wants to listen to are being published to our type of platform because a lot of players believe it's a quantity game. But over time, we have seen that the players that have succeeded the most is the ones that understand it's not a quantity game. It's actually building over time great series from big authors that is relevant for people because the algorithm will never give everyone the same chance in our type of service. It will focus on what do people actually listen all the way through and what do they enjoy when they become a paying user. So more books in the service does not solve anything if it's not a higher quality. And the good thing is that we're probably the perfect experimentation platform for publishers at this age if they want to try out new books. So hopefully we believe that we can play a role as this develops, the AI hype, but also perhaps in a couple of years, publishers will view BookBeat's Publisher Insight platform as their own Google Analytics. Because in our service, we can see, do people engage with what is being published? Do they listen all the way through? What do they listen to afterwards? How does it play with the algorithm? And publisher will get real-time data to see if people are actually enjoying the AI-created content. So hopefully we can be an experimentation platform for publishers when they start to venture into this field. But it doesn't solve a big short-term problem because there are already so many books published on all the markets where we operate. And it's not quantity that is needed. It's actually even more quality in what is being created. So, yeah, a long answer. But I think if we become the Google Analytics for publishers in the long term, I think AI was perfect. But I don't think we need to be the one that start to create a lot of books in BookBeat. We should be the helping hand and the enabler for publishers there.
So very kind of business-centered, nuanced approach, which, again, going back to what you mentioned earlier, I think probably helps that to have an owner who is focused on generations, not quarters. And you're focused on building a really good business and a really good service for customers.
Yeah, if I were raising capital right now, I probably would have given you another answer. But since we have just reached profitability, I can give you the sincere answer.
I love that. How do you think about the future of audiobooks? Because when you think about the entire media landscape, media consumption, it has to be one of the industries that has changed the most in the last few decades. I mean, how content, the type of content, the amount of content, where we consume the content has changed so radically over the years and keeps changing. So how are you thinking about your part in all of this? Because ultimately people have 24 hours in a day. They have to sleep for 8, they have to do their work, et cetera, and then they have a fixed amount of time and bandwidth, and they want either inspiration or education or entertainment, and they're going to go to Netflix or TikTok or BookBeat. So how do you think about this entire, it's a very broad question, so you can answer it however you want, but how do you think about the market evolving in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
First of all, the market has changed a lot. Again, going back to the land of milk and honey, Finland, now just 7 years into our journey, for I think most of the publishers in Finland, we are the biggest retail buyer of their books. bigger than the biggest book chain, which has, of course, changed a lot of their view of what are we actually doing in this market, since it's a digital thing that is selling the most and is generating most loyal people to our books. So a lot has already changed, and I don't know if we know what the long-term impact just from that change will be. But I think it again, going back to your question where you said there's a certain amount of hours in a day that people have to spend. On average in BookBeat, I think we're between 20 and 25 hours on average people spend per month in BookBeat. And it's pretty stable exactly when they listen during the week and they build a behavior. By being on this type of platform as publishers and publishing books that apparently people love, otherwise they wouldn't spend this much of their time and money on it, will pretty much ensure them that they will stay relevant, at least for the coming decade, because I don't think streaming services are going away in the next 10 years. And by being on this type of platform, you can be part of forming the long-term behavior also for new generations of listeners and readers. The biggest group of new users in BookBeat signing up is between 25 and 35-year-old people. And they could have put their time and money on Netflix. They could have put their time and money on YouTube. But now they actually see that they can put their time and money on both. Because going back to surveys, which I hate, we have done some of them that show that of the people that pay for BookBeat, 70% of them also pay for Netflix. So we're actually a complement to that, not something that they replace Netflix with. It's actually something that fits into their everyday life. They have their music service, they have their video streaming service, and they have their book service. And together they fill the hours of the day with that. So but by being a service that so many people pay for and spend their time with, probably will make sure that books stay relevant, at least for the foreseeable future.
I certainly hope so. I mean, it's a fantastic format that I think is like you said, it's very different than what's out there. Just because we are doing this on a podcast, I have to ask: will we see BookBeat going into podcasts? Doing a reverse Spotify, or are you focused on books right now?
Yeah, and here I become really boring again. I think I mentioned a lot of times to the team, but also other ones, we should focus on what we can be the best in the world at, and that's books. It's in our name. We should dig even deeper to explore that area where it's still such a low market penetration in the markets where we're at. Even though we're extremely proud of what's happening in the Nordics, it's still so much growth to be found there. And if we want to compete with global players, diversifying into our field, I think we will probably have more success by them becoming even better at our core than trying to beat them at their own game by diversifying into music and podcasts. So from our view, podcast is one of our best marketing tools. We have probably sponsored every podcast in the Nordics and in Germany, and we will continue to do so because it's a good gateway for us to get listening people to start paying for our type of service. But that doesn't mean necessarily that we should be best at it. Just to use a metaphor, when Netflix want to grow, they don't become YouTube. They instead try to do even more longer series and try to even more invest in creating premium content. And podcast, for many people, is still an ad-based product that's the focus in getting reach and selling ads. So we're going to focus on books. I think that's the long-term strategy until we get punched in the face and have to reevaluate.
That sounds like a good strategy. Last question for you, Niclas. You've been CEO now for 8 years, from 0 to 100 million, which is a pretty incredible journey. It surely contains a lot of ups and downs, a lot of wins, but also a lot of failures. So when you look back at the last 8 years, is there anything that stands out as like kind of the major lessons that you've learned, things that you would want to do differently, or just kind of key takeaways from your journey so far?
Yeah, well, that nothing will ever be done. During the first years, I spent like 7 days a week trying to get this to take off. And just when you get ready to enjoy some smooth sailing on the growth journey by delegating operational parts to, well, the amazing team of people that have joined us, some huge obstacle comes up that needs to be dealt with. And as a CEO, building something new together with the team, you need to be engaged in this to encourage them to take new steps, but also making sure that the steps taken align with the overall vision. When we first started off, I remember I was recommended by some people to stay away from the operational parts and focus on strategy, but that is not really how you build a culture of growth and innovation in a new company. Both parts has to be aligned, and and if you're not putting in your time in understanding the elemental part of your business and its challenges, you will not be able to impact the journey in a sufficient way. And I guess you will hear the same thing from every founder. The trick is, of course, to back away quickly when you're not needed in an area, so you give room for people to grow as you scale the company, but you have to be there. And the good thing, though, is that I've been lucky to recruit some extremely talented key people now in the team that together with me focus on getting shit done and impacting our journey and getting their hands dirty together with their teams, not just trying to maneuver the organization through strategy and remote control, because you have to be out there and look at the challenges together with the team and then find a good solution moving forward. So it never becomes smooth sailing in a growth company.
Yeah, I guess that's a really, really good takeaway. And you have to have that perspective if you're going to do it for 8 years. And it seems that you are committed and excited as you were, back 8 years ago to continue growing BookBeat.
Yeah, but it's fun building stuff, and especially when you do it together with a lot of people. And I think also if it's a digital company, you have an endless supply of data, which fits well with my interests. It's so interesting to just see what can we make out of all of this.
Yeah, data-driven, you get to build stuff with people. You have people, data, and kind of building. I can totally see why that would be incredibly exciting to show up every day to work.
Yeah.
Niclas, it's been a true pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about the secret sauce and the journey that you guys have been on. For people who want to follow you, is LinkedIn the best way? Are you writing books on BookBeat? What's the...
No. Again, focus on what you can be the best in the world at, and it will never be writing books. So, if somebody wants to get in touch, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the easiest way. My focus is to preaching the strategic pillars to the BookBeat team, not being out there pushing my own books. And I don't think they would be really interesting for outside people in a way.
I think maybe, let's say another 8 years down the line where BookBeat is doing $1 billion in revenue and 100 million, I think it could be really interesting to kind of jot down some of the lessons in a book, but that's for that's for the future you're focused on.
That's for future generations. It can also become one of these Apple series like We Crashed or The Dropout or something like that. So being a cautionary tale instead of a success story. But so far we have had a pretty good journey, and I'm glad that you had me so I can talk a little bit about all of the things that the team together has built so far. But we're still in the beginning of the journey, so I guess there's a lot of things to come.
Absolutely. I look forward to following that. So for people listening, go check out BookBeat if you're not already a user. Chances are that 5 or 10% of you will be, so that's awesome. But for those who are not, go check it out, and I'll put a link to your personal LinkedIn in the show notes as well. Niclas, once again, thank you so much, and good luck with everything you have going on.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening. You can find all episodes of The Growth Pod on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts.